Hi everyone, it's nice to see you there. So this is Rita from XFix. I'm super excited to be here today, not only because it's our first live stream of the year, but also because we have a pretty special one, which is going to be like a conversation, and we're super happy to have you here. So first of all, to everyone over there, Happy New Year to everyone. I think we can say it. I think we can say it until the end of January, right? I think we're good. Having that said, Happy New Year to everyone. If you're new to the channel, we're super happy to see you here. It's nice to see new faces, and we hope it's only the first of many live streams and videos that you watch from us. So just keep up, and you know what to do. Just follow us in our social media channels and subscribe our channel. So if this is not your first live stream, it's super nice to see you again, and Happy New Year again. It's great to see you again, and as you know, we'll be having a lot of these events in the next few weeks. So you know what to do. Just feel free to also keep joining us. And if you're watching us afterwards in a recording, awesome too as well. That's also great to know. Share with your friends, share on your social media channel. The first live stream of 2022 in our XFix YouTube channel. As a reminder, if you're new here and you haven't heard or you're not sure what XFix it's all about, a brief overview. That could be a talk by itself, maybe a bit of spoiler for next ones, who knows. But XFix is an engineering company focused on providing capacity to product companies. We're not the typical project company due to several reasons, and again, that could be a talk just by itself. But we have three main reasons: a huge focus on community, a strong engineering culture, and a product drive. XFix represents the balance between projects and products, and our teams across Portugal work in building products while dealing with a broad stack. So if you want to know more about our team, what we do, our open positions, our content, how we've been contributing to community, you can make sure to follow us in our social media channels. We're on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, Medium, YouTube, as you know. So we kind of think that we do cool stuff there. So you can, of course, feel free to follow us there and share your thoughts on that. So today we'll have a conversation between ourselves here from XFix, but also with Mauricio Salatino, staff software engineer at VMware, and also continuous delivery for Kubernetes Author. And today he's our guest. So let's dig into that and bring Mauricio, which is also known as Salaboy, to the stage. Let's also bring Otavio, which will also be here today to help us in this conversation of ours. So welcome, guys. It's nice to see you here.
Hello, Rita. Hello, Otavio. How are you, my friend?
Hello, Salaboy. It's amazing to stay here with you. Hello, Rita. Happy
Hi,
New
nice
Year.
to see you. Happy New Year to you too.
Happy New Year to everyone.
Thank you.
So, okay, you have a couple people here.
Mhm.
Guys, remember, today is an open discussion, so please bring your questions, especially about Kubernetes, Operator, CNCF, Knative, wherever you would like to talk. Mainly because here today is more uh, to answer questions. So if you have a tough question, don't worry. Salaboy here to answer all the questions because I have no idea about Kubernetes. So
Exactly.
first,
That's good.
let's take the first question, Salaboy. It's this one. I believe is more philosophical than the technical.
Sounds good.
What does mean Kubernetes?
Oh, what does it mean? So you mean like the Greek word?
Yes.
That's a very good question. As far as I remember, it was something about sailing, right? Sailing complicated waters. But it comes
Yes,
from the Greek,
exactly.
so we can definitely look for the specific definition of the word. My Greek is very bad, and there are tons of like Kubernetes projects around that Greek mythology as well. So it's pretty interesting that they have chosen that kind of like naming.
You
We have
know
some
me,
comments.
I love mythology, so I usually
Nice.
learn these kind of words,
Yeah.
especially when I go to Italy and Greece, in Athens as
Nice.
well.
Yeah,
But
that's good. That's good. It's
oh,
yeah, it's such a complicated name for a project, right?
yes. But anyway, let's move
We
on
have
to
people joining. Yeah. I can see the
Yes, the
comments.
people are joining. So please
Awesome.
bring your questions.
Yeah.
And by the way,
Yep.
what do you believe is cloud native?
Oh,
And
what
what
do
is
I
cloud
believe is
native
cloud
for
native?
you?
So for me, it's just a set of practices and a set of like architectural, decisions that you need to make in order to make your applications work well in the cloud. And when I mean the cloud, I tend to think about like different cloud providers and how they are basically giving you computing power that you can basically buy as you use instead of like buying your own servers and running your own servers inside your company using this infrastructure that is provided, by use by cloud providers. And that's a very different paradigm as the one that I used to learn when I was like at university, for example, where I was designing my applications to run in a very specific hardware with the client server architecture, which was pretty monolithic. So cloud native in general are kind of like all these practices that you will need to follow in order to make sure that your application kind of like scales in these new infrastructures that are available to us. Does that make any sense?
Yes, and that's
I
wonderful, especially because
Yeah,
everybody has your own answer about cloud native, right?
I
So
do have
cloud
an
native,
article. I do have an article in my blog that I have there, like in the comments. Maybe we can share that with the
yes.
audience,
Rita, do you mind
which
to share it in the YouTube?
because it basically covers some of these aspects about like what do I think that we need to be thinking when we
Oh,
think about
yes.
Kubernetes and cloud native. So resiliency is one, making sure that we follow and use containers in a way as a paradigm to simplify how we run applications and all that stuff. It's covered there. And that's part of the book that I'm writing, which is about continuous delivery for Kubernetes. And yeah, and there I'm covering a bunch of other topics as well. But I think that might be interesting for people that is starting with Kubernetes and using it like daily as well.
Okay. Okay, it's shared. That's a
Perfect.
good one. Okay,
Yeah, I think that.
Maximilian,
Yep. Go.
I guess he's a close friend of us. Sarah boy,
Mhm.
what are the challenges that you need to dealing with once you are jumping to Kubernetes world?
There are a bunch of challenges, and I would say that it really depends on kind of like what's your background, right? Like it really depends if you are like a developer. My background is a Java developer. I've been working with Java for a long time, and I remember when I started with Kubernetes, the first challenge was to learn about containers, kind of like switch my head to stop thinking about application servers, for example, or servlet containers, into more like applications that can run in standalone mode and building kind of like smaller applications as well, like services. But you need to be careful there. Like the main challenge, I would say that it's for a developer, like learning about the tooling, the amount of tools and the amount of projects that are being built in the Kubernetes space. It's quite big. You need to know that Kubernetes is just the base layer that you will use in order to deploy your applications and to run your applications in the cloud. But there are tons of other things that you will need to have installed in your Kubernetes cluster in order to use it in a production environment, for example. So I would say tooling is the big challenge that you will face with your developers and your teams. They will need to learn a bunch of new tools, and those tools are not simple. You need to get used to them. So it takes time.
Oh, ho. And ask it, give us one question from your perspective. What the
Mhm.
real reason why you need to understand Kubernetes operator? But
As I was,
first,
yeah, go
explain
for
to
it.
us what is Kubernetes
Mhm.
and operators.
Kubernetes is a very interesting project that was developed by Google and donated to the CNCF, to the Cloud Native Continuous, the Cloud Native Continuous Foundation, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Sorry, too many foundations nowadays. Uh, and the project is all about making sure that we can deal with the data center. That basically means lots of different computers uh, using an abstraction, using an API that developers can use and interact programmatically with it. But that API just exposes us like a single computer. So we as developers, we are going to interact with a cluster of computers, but without seeing or understanding how many computers do we have. And Kubernetes will do all the scheduling. That basically means that it will decide where to run our applications. So at the end of the day, we have an API where we can tell, deploy this application for me, and Kubernetes will take that application and it will decide in which hardware it's going to run based on the requirements, based on the availability of that cluster, based on how many nodes it has. It will also make decisions about, you can make Kubernetes to make decisions about creating different replicas for you. So running multiple replicas of your application, which will bring resilience, for example. So at the end of the day, Kubernetes is just that. It's just an API to be able to deploy applications in the cloud. If you go nowadays to different cloud providers like Google, Amazon, or Microsoft, you will see that every Kubernetes, every cloud provider, every major cloud provider is giving you like Kubernetes APIs to use their services. And that's basically the main reason behind that. It's because Kubernetes is becoming, in some way or another, kind of like that operating system for developers and infrastructure team to deploy applications in a unified way, right? Like it doesn't really matter where you are. You know that if you run these commands or create these files, your applications will be deployed. And that's a very interesting, set of tools around it. And for developers, it's getting us closer to the infrastructure. Before we used to just develop our applications and throw that to the operation teams so they can deploy that application in different environments. Now with Kubernetes, that's much more accessible. We have access to the APIs, and we can even manage our applications ourselves.
Okay, that's a good one. And you tell me that you are a Java developer.
I am still a Java developer.
You
Just a
see,
bit.
yes, indeed
I'm
we
doing more.
are,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I'm
usually
doing
don't
more
use
Go nowadays.
anymore, right? Fortunately, not.
Well, yeah. So I'm a weird mix. So I'm using Go and Java kind of like almost daily because one of my main tasks now at VMware, I'm working for the Knative open source project, which is a Kubernetes project, like Kubernetes extension. And I'm trying to bring these kind of like communities closer, like the Java community and the Kubernetes and the Knative community closer. So I'm doing a bunch of work around Java, around Go. I'm trying to bring all the best things that the Go language has, the Go ecosystem has to Java, and the other way around as well. So it's an interesting kind of like journey. It's very good to compare two languages and two ecosystems.
Okay, could you tell us the main difference between to write a code with Java and write a code with Golang and Kubernetes operator? Which one do you
Yeah.
prefer?
So this is the thing, right? Like I started writing Kubernetes operators. So Kubernetes operators are just extensions to Kubernetes, right? And they became really popular because Kubernetes, as I mentioned before, is just the base layer on how you can just deploy applications, for example. And it doesn't come with other stuff, right? So if you want to do something a little bit more specific to your domain, to your use case, to your business, you will need to extend it. And one way of extending Kubernetes is creating operators, which are basically extensions to the logic of Kubernetes itself. You will write a component that will run inside Kubernetes, and it's going to deal with your specific domain requirements, right? Imagine that you have like a very specific application that needs to be scaled in a very particular way. Then you will need to extend Kubernetes to support that scenario. And to your question, right, like what's better, to write it in Java or to write it in Go? The reality behind that question and the answer to that question is that Go, like Kubernetes was created in Go, so the Kubernetes community is very advanced on the Go side because they have a lot of tools already. They have created a bunch of stuff in Go that makes your life easier when you're building operators. I've started writing operators in Java, and in general, the only thing that you do inside an operator is you interact with the Kubernetes APIs, but from inside Kubernetes. So you basically create a container that is going to talk with the cluster APIs and will perform different actions, but that container is going to run inside the cluster. So that requires a bunch of permissions and a bunch of behaviors to be implemented in there. Usually a controller basically takes care of dealing with the resource type, a specific resource type. And for example, you can define a resource type like, for example, a message broker queue, or you can define an application as a resource type and then create that controller to define what to do with that resource type. To answer your question, Otavio, I would say that if you write it in Java, you have less tools than in Go nowadays to build your operators, but you can build it in any language, right? Nowadays, the Kubernetes community provides APIs in all major languages. You have Rust, you have C#, you have Java, you have Go. You can just use your, those APIs in order just to interact with the cluster. But there are projects like, for example, KubeBuilder. In Knative, we have our own way of creating controllers, and those kind of like libraries and those frameworks are way much more advanced in a way of how do they tolerate HA, so high availability scenarios. How do they do caching so they don't just hit the APIs of Kubernetes too hard? Because if you hit the cluster APIs too hard, then you might risk your applications not being able to sync and all that stuff. So they are way much more advanced, but the Java community is catching up really, really fast as well. So nowadays, if you're interested in writing operators, you can just do it in any language that you want to. I've seen like even operators written in Python. That's pretty common for data science as well. So all the other languages are catching up. Go is still the most advanced, I think, not because the language is much more powerful, but because the ecosystem is much more mature, and there are tons of other libraries that have been built around that space.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially because we had this discussion before with open source product that is Charlie CD. That's basically Kubernetes based, where we had this kind of tension between, okay, each language should I choose to write with Kubernetes operator? Should I go to Java? Should I go to Go? And we are kind of inclined to use Go, especially because the number of tools, we have more environments, we have more frameworks to make our life as developers easier when you go to Go language.
Yeah,
I think that is
exactly. But
nice.
but again, there are some frameworks in Java that will make your life easier. But true, like in Go, you have way much more. It is true. Another thing that I would like to mention here is that, for example, if you use KubeBuilder, they do two things. They scaffold your project, which is nice, right? Like they basically provide you a template for the operator itself, and also allows you to automatically generate some types based on some structures that you define in Go. And the other side of that is that they use something that's called controller runtime, which is again like an abstraction that allows you to create your controllers for your Kubernetes resources. Besides that, they are not doing much, right? And as soon as you use the scaffold for the first time, then you are not going to do anything else with that besides like generating some types and updating some types. So from my personal experience, it's like maybe the only part that is missing, at least on the Java ecosystem, is all the caching and dealing with high available scenarios where you can just have multiple controllers running at the same time and treating different resources and all that stuff. That's something that we have there in Knative, and it's working quite well. But the only reason why that works is because it was created like 3 years ago, and we have been improving it since then.
Okay, let's go to the next question that belongs to XKicks. About your book. Indeed, we wrote a book together, but let's
We
focus
did.
on this one here.
Mm-hmm.
So, could you tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about your book? Can you give us a brief overview and why should
Mm-hmm.
we buy it?
Yeah.
Oh, the first
So,
reason is because it's Salaboy. So he's
yeah,
a
I
nice
would say that
guy. Buy
I'm a
it.
nice guy, so you should buy it. There is also, I mean, I don't know if Rita can put that there. Like I have like a 30% discount code for the early access. So here I'm writing a book that it's called Continuous Delivery for Kubernetes, and that's for Manning. That's the publisher. And you can access the content while I'm writing it, which basically gives you the opportunity to write comments, to ask questions, to ask me to expand on certain things. So definitely, if you are interested in the topics, just go and check it out. The book is all about trying to speed up your journey to Kubernetes. So if you are not working with Kubernetes, what I'm trying to do is like every chapter is covering different tools that will get you closer to be able to continuously deliver software on top of Kubernetes. Kubernetes, one of the main advantages is that it was designed to continuously deliver new versions of your applications without stopping, the entire application, shutting it down and just deploying the new version. It is designed to support these scenarios where you can just keep rolling new versions into it, And Kubernetes, and if you design the application correctly, will just have a new version ready for the user without the user noticing that the application has changed. When I think about like examples of things that work like that, I always think about Gmail, for example. Like Gmail, you never see Gmail going down, and Gmail is always there. But from time to time, you see a new feature, you see kind of like that something has changed. And the team at Google, basically, they are just deploying new versions of the Gmail application all the time without like impacting any of the users. They do that like in different regions. They do it like, very set, they do it perfectly so the users are not impacted. That's kind of like the kind of thing that we should be looking to do with Kubernetes. And if we are not doing that when we're using Kubernetes, we are missing out on big things on why we are using Kubernetes at the end of the day, right? The idea of cloud deployments is that you can just keep rolling stuff. So in the book, I start like discussing about like what's cloud native, what's continuous delivery, which is again like another set of philosophies and practices about how you can keep delivering value without shutting down the entire application or being slowed down by how you are organizing your teams. And then I start talking about like more real life tools, like for example, Tekton for building pipelines and building cloud native applications. Then I talk a little bit about Crossplane for multi-cloud environments. That's a little bit more advanced, but the moment that you start using Kubernetes, you want to keep building on top of the Kubernetes APIs, and you don't want to start relying too much on the cloud provider if you want to move your applications between different clouds. Then I jump into Knative, and Knative is the project that I'm working for, so I'm really passionate about. And it has a bunch of things that can help you to go faster when you're using Kubernetes. On the simplification side, it's like there are things that for when you use Kubernetes are pretty complex, and you need to create a lot of definitions and a lot of files to deploy your applications. With Knative, that's easier. But also with Knative, what you can do is you can build functions and think about like Kubernetes as a platform where you can just deploy functions and scale those functions independently, mostly like Lambdas, for example, in AWS. And then I'm covering a bunch of other projects like tools for supply chain, tools for security, tools for doing single sign-on, and how do you deal with authentication in these distributed systems? How do you build user interfaces that can turn on and turn off different aspects of the application? And again, trying to cover a bunch of topics and practices that will make your life easier, always from a perspective of a developer. This is not like a DevOps book. It's more like a developer book that you can just read and figure it out what tool suits you better for the job that you're doing.
Oh, nice. By the way, we talked a lot about Knative. Could you explain us what is Knative?
Yeah, 100%. So Knative is let's I will just put it super simple because it's quite difficult to explain what it is, but it's a bunch of extensions to Kubernetes to make your life easier. Remember that Kubernetes is just the base layer of things for deploying applications, but Knative brings some extensions that will make your life easier on two different fronts. The first one is called Knative Serving, and it basically allows you to do more advanced stuff with your applications. Like, for example, automatically keep track of the history of your application's configurations and then being able to roll back to previous versions, or running multiple versions of your applications at the same time and then direct traffic to these different versions of the application depending on different circumstances, right? Like you can say to these users, we are going to show the latest version. To these other users that are, more concerned about like new bugs and they don't want the new features, we can just route them to the other version. That gives you extra flexibility on how you can keep deploying new versions because you are not deploying stuff that it's going to go live to all the users. So you can have fine control on how to route traffic there, which is pretty important when you want to go fast and when you want to not block your teams because you are not sure if a version is going to work correctly. The other side of Knative is Knative eventing, which brings to Kubernetes something that Kubernetes, like the Kubernetes APIs, doesn't cover, which is consumers and producers of events. When you build applications at scale, there is a point where you want to build everything as like a REST request and interact with multiple services using REST. But when you scale, there are some scenarios where HTTP doesn't work and where you, for example, have a service that is producing a lot of data and you have another services that wants to consume those data, and you can have multiple services consuming. For those kind of scenarios, having the concept of producers and consumer of events are really important, and that's what Knative is bringing to the table. It brings the concept of producer, consumer of event, and also the routers that are in charge of routing these events between the different applications and between the different services. So that's pretty much what Knative is in like 2 minutes explanation. And it's pretty complex, but it's really fun. That's why I decided to cover it there in the book, because I believe that it can save you so much time when you're using Kubernetes that it's crazy. I do really believe that Knative should be installed in every Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah, that's nice. I also checked out the products, and they mentioned something around serverless.
Yes,
So,
that's correct. Yeah.
so
So go ahead.
go ahead. Should I go?
You go. You
And
go.
so it's a good solution to I avoid vendor locking, right? So instead of use um, Amazon solution or Google solution where I had a vendor locking, I able to
Mhm.
use Knative to decrease that discretion, and also I'm able to use more multi-cloud vendors. It looks like a fancy strategy to a cloud definition solution.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the main stories behind Knative, right? Like it brings on top of the Kubernetes APIs all the extensions for scaling, which is the serving part, for eventing as well, just to build functions. Because at the end of the day, what a function is just a piece of application, a piece of software that will be starting whenever it's needed, and it's probably going to react to different events that are happening, in the environment. The usual example for lambdas, for example, is to create a lambda, a function that it's going to be listening to S3 bucket events. So whenever you put like a file in a bucket, you're going to just call this function, and that's exactly what you can do with Knative without without using any Amazon specific tool. You're using stuff that it's built on top of the Kubernetes APIs that you can find in any other cloud vendor.
Oh, nice. Hey, Lucius Trindade. He's a good one. Okay,
There you go.
Knative is amazing. You sell me that is a wonderful product you I start to looking for and maybe start to contribute for.
Yeah.
So, do you have any beautiful issues or first issues that
Yeah.
I can go to start to
Mhm.
involving with that community?
Definitely, yeah, and we are always looking for new contributors, right? And again, remember that Knative is written in Go, and if that's not your primary language, that's fine because it's pretty easy to get if you know any other language. So definitely get in touch. My Twitter is at Salaboy, and my private messages are open, so you can just write me there. I will guide you to the right, first issue. We will probably have a quick chat about like what are you interested more into, because there are like different things like changing controllers, more like on the user side, on the APIs, more on like in the infrastructure, how do we build and how do we test Knative. So it really depends of what you're interested in, but I can definitely point you in the right direction because it's a pretty big project and there is a lot of work to do in there. So definitely get in touch via Twitter or via email as well. I'm pretty sure that you can figure out my email with my nickname.
Okay, nice. Let's see if I forget some question. Thales Lopes Mendonça de Freitas. Oh, the operator architecture have some components like informers, event handler, work queues. Each one do you think is the most necessary to learn in depth?
In depth. Okay, I think that all of them, you definitely need to learn how they interact, right? Remember that we haven't explained that, but Kubernetes in general works in this like continuous loop. So basically, it's all the time looking at the hardware that you have available, and it's also looking at the database that contains the definitions of the thing that it needs to deploy. So it's all the time just checking the database and see what's the desired state of the world, and then just checking at the hardware to see if the applications that you're expecting to be running are actually running. And it's keeping that loop all the time. It's keeping in sync the information that it's in this database to the actual cluster of machines that are running. So controllers basically are built around these concepts, right? Like informers and event handlers and work queues. And that basically means that whenever you want to change the state of the world, change the state of the database, you just do it right into that database by just calling the APIs. And then the controller will just get the notification that something was added to this database, right? They are using a database that it's called etcd, that basically allows you to watch for changes, and that's where informers comes into play, right? So every time that you add something into the database, your component gets a notification saying, hey, something changed in the database. Now you have a new record, let's say. You have a new entry, you have a new instance there that you need to take care of. And the controller, in this case, the operator, is going to look for that type, check the hardware, check the cluster to see if that type is already running or in which state is that, and then report back and try to execute an action in order to make sure that whatever you put in the database is also reflected in the hardware that it's running. So yeah, you definitely need to use them. Like, you need to use all these concepts. And what I would recommend is definitely take a look at Kube Builder. Just create a small controller, a small operator, and check also the Knative sample controller. I can share the link here. Let me share the link in private so people can also see it.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
So why you are writing the okay, you got the link here.
Yeah.
And by the way, we wrote a book together. So guys,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to check it out, this book is for free. It's a summary between 12 authors where everybody wrote an chapter, and each chapter has one tip about good practice in cloud and code design. So Mauricio Salaboy wrote about DDD and where to go next, especially
Mm-hmm.
focus on cloud and Knative and whatever. Okay, Alexander Simonov, can you
Mm-hmm.
tell more about KERA and
Mm-hmm.
to build event-driven architecture in Kubernetes?
Yeah. So KERA is not it's not something that will help you with building event-driven architectures. It will help you to scale based on events. So with KERA is just basically an autoscaler that will just monitor different sources of events and then scale up your applications depending on how many events are created, right? You will be able to define, for example, how many requests are coming into the cluster, like to your application, and based on the amount of requests, you can scale up your application to support that demand. You can do the same by looking at message queues, for example, and if you are sending tons of messages to a message to a queue, then you can say, okay, I will just need to create more consumers for those messages so I can process them faster. But for building event-driven applications, I will totally recommend Knative eventing, which brings kind of like these concepts of producers and consumers of events. And then the routers as well, that allows you to say, I'm sending an event. I don't know where I'm sending it. I'm just sending it to a broker in this case. And then I can just wire in Kubernetes to which services these events are going to be sent. You can create filters to say only events with this type are going to go to service A, and events with type B, we are going to go to service B, for example. Knative eventing kind of like brings all these concepts to build event-driven architectures on top of Kubernetes. And again, I'm not super familiar with KERA. I know what it is, but I haven't used it. But in general, KERA is around that. It's around scaling applications based on events, but usually for scaling purposes, not for building your event-driven applications.
Oh yeah. By the way, I mentioned the open source product that we had a discussion between each language should I choose to write the Kubernetes
Mhm.
operator. Here you go. I share the link. By the way, if you
Perfect.
want to know more about it, is charliecd.io. Rita, do
Mhm.
you mind if you share the link? So it's an open source product. It's a Kubernetes based. And the main idea behind the Charlie CD is to make easier to you go to production, especially use the hypothesis driven development. The idea is you to do queries. Okay, I need to create a ring where the ring is my criteria to go in uh, that ring. So okay, I'd like to create a queries or create any kind of promotion where just people who lives in São Paulo should go in on that criteria. So we can use hypothesis-driven development to test your hypothesis and then open to more and more people. And indeed, it happened the whole time. It happened right now if you're Netflix user, Uber user, whatever. There are several hypotheses, and each hypothesis run in a different kind of clients, in different kind of criteria. So it's a wonderful idea. It's open source as well. So if you want to know more, want to check it out, get more information, and learn how to contribute, so go there and follow us. And
That's really
thank
nice.
you,
I will
Rita.
definitely check it out.
Yes, please do.
So is it written in Go then, right? Or is it? Let me see.
It's a mix between Java and Go. We are
Huh?
discussing about moving to Go.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. I will definitely check it out. Like you have like good things there. Okay, so you have some Helm charts as well. Perfect.
Okay. So
Mhm.
we are almost done here. Is there any more questions? Give once, give twice. If not, Salaboy, that was a huge pleasure to stay with you here to share about knowledge. Guys, everybody please follow him in Twitter. So at Salaboy. And also
Get in
please
touch. Yeah.
get in touch. And if you know more about XGeek, so go check it out.
Yeah,
Ah,
it,
there's
it
one more question and then we're able to finish. Okay, Lucius Trindade asked us about could you share the Knative status to
Mhm.
become a CNCF product?
Yeah, that those were big news like last year, right? Last year in November, we did like the first GA release of Knative, which was very long due, right? Like Knative is a very old project. It has like 4 years old already, and we just created the first 1.0 GA release on November. And that basically triggered the decision by Google to start the donation for the project to the CNCF, which was something that was very very welcomed by the community, and we believe that that was the right step. So right now there is a pull request in CNCF to start the incubation process. The CNCF now needs to accept the project as a CNCF project, and for that there is a lot of documentation that we need to gather and collect about the project, who is using it, the status of the project, the community around it. So we are in the process of filling out all those documents. If you're interested, get in touch as well. I can guide you to the right links to the documents that we're collecting and all that stuff. It's really interesting to see that happening. I'm really excited to see Knative as part as the CNCF. I think that it's going to be a great move for the project and for the community itself.
awesome. I think it
Okay.
was a great question for us to wrap up today's live stream. As Otavio said, so if you have any questions, you have like 1, 2, 3 seconds for you to submit them. In the meantime, as we were saying before, it was awesome to have you here, Salvatore. Great talk. I think everyone got quite inspired, and we have not a couple, but plenty of links to follow up on and to make sure that we go through them. And again, make sure to check Salaboy's book as well. You have a discount, so that's something for you to take into consideration. Thank you so much for your availability, both to you, Salaboy, and also to Otavio. And thank you also to everyone who joined us today at home. It was nice to see you here. We actually missed you, so it was a great time a great chance to see you once again. And let's meet again next week. Okay, same time. Thank you so much. Bye,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Again, the next one will be Karin and I to talk about career and some tips advice. So
Exactly. It will be a good one. So keep an eye. Thank you. See you next time.